How's that, Eric?
Perfect.
Good.
Great. And
Eric,
perfect background
should
as well.
I exit out and pop back in? Because I think that's the only way for me to change my audio. Or are you
Nope.
okay?
Nope, that's perfect for now. Thank you.
Dr. Gause, you are rocking that bow tie. It takes a certain type of person to do it, but you totally do it.
Thank you so much. I'll tell you a fun fact. I started wearing bow ties, I guess 16, 17 years ago, so I would look older to my patients. And obviously now I don't need that any longer, but just kept wearing the bow ties.
So good luck.
Well, come on, Rob. You've got the full lapel pin, the flower.
No, I put this on because I knew Dr. Gause was going to represent. So something just bring me to the table. You know, everyone likes to see it at the table.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Again, we'll get rolling in just a second. Give another minute for people to join, and the jersey in the background, Dr. Gause. Number 13.
Yeah, we have a few jerseys around. A couple here and there.
Beautiful.
Oh, yeah.
Fantastic. All I have is all my little my 1-year-old and the 4-year-olds, right? All the little small ones floating around here. Beautiful. We have actually, we just did the lease for the dentist for the San Francisco Giants, and he's got the World Series ring. He actually did a fantastic video of thanks for us. Perfect. Beautiful. All right, 7:03. First of all, welcome to everyone that is coming through and joining. We know there's lots going on this evening in the city. Certainly really appreciate everybody's time. We are recording this. There's been lots of requests and lots of responses to the emails that we sent out today in preparation of really a fantastic event. So from that perspective, certainly really appreciate everybody's time across the board. So I wanted to do some quick introductions from that perspective, and certainly really reflect and share a little bit about this evening, tonight, where it came to be and what we're looking at moving forward. So first of all, from that perspective, two fantastic guests tonight to really mix up some of the flavor of some of these webinars. If you're the first to join one of ours in the past, welcome. We really wanted to make this a lot more about panelist discussions, open discussions, and lots of Q&A. So one of the components here is we want to keep things certainly very interactive. So one of the things I would suggest here is first and foremost we got a quick poll to come up. So we're happy to customize some of the content based on the room. So if we can pull up the quick poll, just to get a sense of in terms of what some of your objectives are. Of course, at the tri-state area these days, we've seen no shortage of change, updates, vacancies, rental rates, all of the craziness in the pandemic. Rob's, it seemed like yesterday we were standing at Greater New York, and then shortly thereafter, it was turned into a medical triage. So from that perspective, we'll give everybody a quick opportunity to fill that out. The first one is really what helps to best describe your current situation. Are we planning to open or relocate the practice? Are we looking to acquire, right? Planning to transition, right? Or contemplating just staying put, right? Doubling down and seeing what we can do from a support perspective. Number 2 is what's the purpose? General knowledge, right? Looking for some assistance, looking for some financial guidance or otherwise. Some questions certainly about the current lease, right? Are you contemplating buying or building a new practice? And then also a lot of requests earlier today for some additional assistance, let it be in terms of reviewing the lease or rental rates, et cetera. As well, a little section here, section 6, if you're looking to connect with a Bank of America representative, which we have here tonight. On that note, my pleasure to do some introductions and our first with our celebrity guest, Dr. Lee Gause. Dr. Gause joins us as the founder of Smile Design Manhattan. I'm sure you've seen his Instagram and otherwise. He has established himself really as a clinical leader in cosmetic dentistry techniques. If you've been following TMZ, you'll notice the Michael Strahan April Fool's Day joke. And that was certainly a great real reference of the amazing work that they do at the Midtown West practice in New York City. Dr. Gause, from that perspective, not only on the dentistry side, but also a large philanthropy side as well. So a lot of it is also linked at this time to Smile Design Gallery, which is a charity he founded that uses art sales. Some you might be able to see in the background to fund dental care for low-income children and seniors, as well as men and women who are being rehabilitated from homelessness. So Dr. Gause, huge pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. Excited to be here.
Fantastic. And next, the Rob from New York, as he says. Rob Malandruccolo is, truly a seasoned expert as it pertains to financing, available capital, best practices, and really what the do's and don'ts are for opening, expanding a clinic. So with over 17 years worth of dental industry experience, previously working for the 2 largest dental companies in the market, and has helped over 450 dental clinics. So from that perspective, an incredible lineup for you tonight to be able to continue to really dive into some of the top questions that we're seeing throughout the country and especially throughout the tri-state area. So purpose of this evening, number 1 is market updates. What are we seeing that's changed, especially now that we're coming out the far side of COVID, knock on wood. A lot of questions pertaining to how to avoid the risks, including $100,000 risks pertaining in the dental office lease. Number 2, how do we mitigate that risk, right? How do we help to ensure that the lease, right, financing and other things are in place to help protect your family if, heaven forbid, something were to happen to you, as well as to mitigate any sort of exposure that you may have or unnecessary exposure from a variety of different aspects or surprises, shall we say. And number 3 is really how to look at common mistakes that dentists makes in the buying or building of the new practice, as well as discovering, right, some of the financial programs and resources across the board. So let's jump in. For those of you that haven't heard of us before, Cirrus, we are the only healthcare specialized tenant representation firm of our kind in North America. We're now 27 years in the business, founded by doctors for doctors, 12,000 successful lease negotiations under our belt. And truly a privilege to help to be with you all this evening. So let's look at the data for this for a second. And that's really one of the big themes for tonight is to get the facts, help to be prepared, and help to make sure that you're going into whatever project or situation with all the specific data. So from that perspective, we have access to over 4.6 million properties tracked. So here's what the data is showing us today. Of course, my crystal ball is no better than yours. A lot of the software and analytics we use do some extrapolations. Of course, the future is a crystal ball. From that perspective, let's look nationally first before we get into the tri-state. Number 1 is market rental growth year over year. As you can see, of course, the pandemic had a massive impact to the commercial real estate market in 2020, and it certainly increased since through here to 2021. And the availability rate, which of course hit the city pretty hard as well, and some of the locations we never thought would be coming available suddenly have as an impact of the pandemic. So the national availability rate has been high, right? Meaning that there's more supply in the market to benefit from. From that perspective, really touch on a few components here. Let me just cover the additional screen. So as we look through the data, the national leasing activity. So as we can see here, number 1 is looking at that data. We're now seeing certainly a decline between 2020 into 2021, while rebounding certainly nowhere near what it was back in the 2018, 2019. Right. So from that perspective, if we can all see the screen, we should be able to see number 1 is throughout the city. So New York, looking through Dr. Gause's area, what we see here today is vacancy rates have certainly continued to skyrocket through 2020 and now 2021. It's starting to come down. But in comparison, right, it has provided some pretty unique opportunities. In addition to that, market rents and per square footage. So that did see a bit of a decline. And so we've seen that start to rebound, not quite to where we were pre-pandemic, but based on the analytics and machine learning and whatnot that's through here, we see that and can extrapolate that things will be coming back to normal, right? And market rates will continue to increase at the usual rate. Certainly towards upstate and Buffalo, right? Certainly much larger peak in terms of vacancies and change in the marketplace, yet rental rates remained quite constant. Northern New Jersey, Rob and I've done some deals through there. Right now, we've certainly seen a bit of a dip, quite a low amount of vacancies, right? As rental rates have stayed quite constant. Interestingly, we see that vacancies will start to be getting back to pre-pandemic levels as well. Ocean City, similarly, right, with some fluctuations as the market starts to return. So what does that really mean as a takeaway? No different than Connecticut. There's a lot of unique opportunities out there, which is depending on the market, depending on vacancies in your area. If you've noticed on your walk to work today, and you've noticed more than 5 for lease signs, or into your building, and you notice that there's a 20% vacancy, might be a very unique opportunity to contemplate staying, expanding, relocation, or beyond. So from that perspective, what is a lease? Rob and I do this at many of the courses throughout North America and certainly at One Bryant Park. And as we go around the room, what is the lease? What does it mean for us? And one of the core components here is underneath it all, as Rob will be pleased to see a Bank of America check, right? It is ultimately a check. Right? It is one of the largest checks that you doctors will be spending to one single organization, one specific entity in your personal, right, and or professional careers. So one thing to take away from this evening's course is how important things such as the lease can be in terms of large financial commitment. This is how the landlord's accounting for it. When you take the monthly payment multiplied by the annual increase at 3 or 4%, multiplied by the 27-year on average that the dental practice is in the same location, in many cases, you're looking at a multi-million-dollar commitment. So ask yourselves, if you're about to sign a check for $2 million, would you not want to make sure that you've got reduced as much of the risk, right? And to help make sure that it was not just landlord friendly, but certainly tenant friendly as well. In addition to that, you are the best tenant on the planet, right? No, regardless of what your landlord may tell you, you are the best tenant on the planet. Has your landlord ever told you that, Dr. Gause?
Landlord has never told me that, but the building tells us that, especially in COVID. You know, our building became half empty, and there's one other dental practice in this building, and you know, we're both here. So no, but the landlord's never sent me my edible arrangement to tell me about his favorite.
No Christmas cards, nothing. So from really when looking at it from a different perspective, you do the highest build out costs of any commercial tenant on the planet, 250, some across the country over $400 per square foot build out cost. Lowest default rate at 0.5% in terms of defaulting on the lease. Therefore, the likelihood that a dentist reaches the end of the term versus a restaurant is almost a complete inverted relationship. So it's far more banking these funds based on having a dentist in place. Plus, right, you're COVID proof. It's proven now that the dentist can never work from home. So how do we help to look at things differently? So as we start to get into some of the core panelist questions and beyond, let's reflect as to why things like the lease, as well as financing sources, as well as build outs are so important. So some key themes, which should go without saying, but ultimately the office location is the business. The business is the location. So as we look to it from that perspective, right, the lease, for example, or the type of financing, or any of these type of components, or the contractor use, right, it can either create a figurative, right, or literal crumbling foundation, right, or a rock solid foundation to build your future business upon. Right, the lease, that's certainly true, right? That a great location can be marred by a bad lease or bad financing, right? Or challenges throughout the entire build out. Number two is the high cost of build out, right? To get it wrong or to have your contractor reach out and to say, whoops, you know that handpiece you wanted to run, right? Well, unfortunately now, right, the water intake is a 1/2 inch versus a full inch. And now suddenly we've got to go back to the drawing board and the landlord says it's going to be an extra 20 grand because it's not in the lease. Of course, as you're walking out and you're looking across the street, right, to say, hey, you know what, maybe tomorrow I'll move my practice across the street, right? Right now in the city, as Rob will attest, right? How long would it take, Rob, to move a practice right now in Manhattan or throughout your market?
You should plan. It's best to plan for at least a year in advance.
Correct. Right. And any uncommon delays, right? Chip shortages. I mean, God knows what's going on with the global supply chain these days, but could be upwards of 18 months we've seen in some cases. Right. And then really last but not least is some of the themes we're going to touch on. But of course, how do we look at this all the way through the eventual transition? The lease that you've structured today is going to carry through, and the lease from 1988, if you purchased a practice, is still the governing lease through today. Certainly looking at a lot of good friendly names I can see here logged in. I know there's a number of you that own your own location. So let's talk a little bit about that. And Rob, you can certainly share a little bit about what you're now seeing in terms of the buying versus leasing. From a perspective of contracts, buying versus leasing right now, there's pros and cons, right? So we're talking about buying the specific real estate, right, versus leasing. So of course, the buying, large upfront cost, right? Number two, you become your own landlord, which obviously has its own benefits. It can be a passive form of income for yourself. Heck, you're paying it from one pocket to the other. Right. You've got the flexibility, of course, of how you're using the space. No one can come in to say, hey, you can't do any ortho anymore because I've just brought in an orthodontist down the road to be exclusively focused on, to be the only ortho in the space of the building. Right. And of course, the ability to control the property, let it be upgrades, changes, expansions, etc. What's interesting is a lot of the growing practices that are going from 2 to 4 or 4 to 8 or beyond, they're protecting that capital. They would much rather use it to deploy another 2 or 4 or 6 locations than tie up a bunch in commercial real estate. So the advantages, obviously, on the leasing side, as I see we've got a few questions on, is really less upfront cost, more flexibility if you found that it's not the right location or at the right time, lots more working capital as you continue to build out that practice. And of course, if you've determined that demographics have changed, new patient flow has changed, right, or the type of practice that you're looking for is no longer able to accomplish it in that area, you've got the flexibility to pick up and relocate. Right? Obviously, it's work, but it's a lot easier than being pot committed to both the real estate or otherwise. The net of this slide is really all about the lease, regardless of the fact that owning versus leasing, the lease becomes a critical component. So for a number of you here, again, looking through the names that do own, you want to think of it for 4 reasons. Number one is from a tax perspective. Right? I'm not giving tax advice, but you want to be very careful that the lease rate is based on fair market rent. You don't want one of your entities, right, your building corp, right, from your practice corp. You want to make sure that you've got a well-defined lease based on current market value. Number 2 is to give clarity, let it be liability, risk, or otherwise. What is your building responsible for, or your unit, right? And what is your practice responsible for? And then that brings us to really number 2 and number 3 and number 4, which is the value of the building, right, as well as the value of the practice. So the question now is, ask yourself, if, heaven forbid, something were to happen to you, right, what is the state of your estate? Done a lot of this through a lot of, whether it be Henry Schein's Dental Business Institute or otherwise, but certainly what is the state of your estate? If you were to pass, let's say your spouse owns a portion of your building or unit, right? And you've got a minority partner in your practice. If you are then gone and the partner buys the balance of the practice, now suddenly you've left your estate, right, in a state of purgatory and disarray, because now suddenly there's no lease, there's no real structure in terms of what's in place. And unfortunately, we have one of those situations right now of a prominent oral maxillofacial surgeon. That exact thing happens. So the more preparation, the more things are designed now, especially COVID has taught us, unfortunately, all of these aspects of what we need to be very cautious with, including things such as a death and disability clause, which for those of you entering into a lease, we'll spend more time talking about, but certainly one of the key things to make sure that you do have in your next lease negotiation is in the protection of things like a death and disability clause, which brings us to our next point. So just before we get to the Q&A and some of the panel discussions, what are some of the $100,000 traps? So first off, right, as I was just touching on, is the death and disability, about halfway through. We had a doctor that was just north of our office that had built out a beautiful 6-operatory new clinic. And unfortunately, at 43 years of age, 3 weeks prior to the grand opening, it passed away due to a massive heart attack. Fully built out practice, no doctor, no patients. What's that practice worth? In this case, right, zero, less than zero. And as we helped the spouse, the landlord said, unfortunately, right, the estate, right, and the lease was binding to the successors and heirs. The estate was responsible for the almost $9,000 a month, increasing at 4% per year for the remaining 9.5 years on the lease. So from that perspective, as we're looking forward, really appreciate the awesomeness of the lease and how it can impact far beyond what you may have imagined. So from that perspective, looking forward, some other things to be aware of are a lot of you may be surprised that if you were to build out a beautiful clinic, most of the landlords will be requiring you to return it to pre-dental condition at the end. Other large mistakes that can be hidden within your lease for those following along, right, are things such as a relocation or demolition right. Some of those components give the landlord, in some cases, 30 days notice, and they can pick you up and move you into any other unit in the entire building. Right? And good news, as the lease I was reviewing yesterday from Los Angeles, unfortunately, right, the landlord will recover 100% of that, with the exception of, right, to the maximum of 2 months worth of base rent. So, right, the real takeaway from some of these components are to be aware of what is and may be hiding within those leases. Number 2 is, how do we help to mitigate some of those costs and risks, which we'll touch on, including things such as personal guarantees, right, other financial costs, right, or in some cases, even the lack or difficulty in being able to assign the lease to a new entity when you eventually go to sell. Or some of you may be surprised to know that even after you've sold, you may be remaining continually liable in the lease. So just a couple of things at a high level. We'll dig into more of those, but I did want to jump right into our panelist discussions here. So what we've done is we've had a number of submitted questions, as well as some frequently asked questions, and really have a bit of an open conversation. So Dr. S, I appreciate the additional questions here. We'll try to answer these as we go. I would encourage others to feel free to post through the Q&A section and or the notes, but certainly the Q&A section is the easiest for us. So on that note, without further ado, Rob, you're up first. So the first key question that we get a lot is, how do I properly start up a practice? And what are the steps I can do to get started? So Rob, with the hundreds of doctors you've worked with, right, what are some key guidance that you can give to a new, right, or mid-career doctor that's contemplating doing it again?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously, the beginning, and honestly, one of the most important parts of the journey, the first step you take when you're going down the path for practice ownership or just pursuing a dental opportunity, is you want to make sure before you go on any sort of shopping spree that you're having your financials, your personal financials reviewed. and that will determine your credit worthiness. The importance of that is banks will not only look at just your credit score, they're going to look at other things like your savings, your credit card balances, your monthly living expenses, and the character of who you are before they make their decision on lending. And by having that we'll say qualification or pre-approval, getting those items reviewed early in the process will help make it a smoother process for you moving forward. The pre-qualification or the approval in that case will provide you with some leverage, leverage to be able to assume property. The leverage may take place. You may have a landlord of a space that you're looking at for either your first office or an additional location, and that landlord is very much interested in your financial situation. A lot of times they want to know that you've either been pre-qualified to be able to assume the space, or they will collect financial documentations, which may include tax returns to show that you could handle a future project in that space. So the best thing I could suggest for anyone that is considering an opportunity, whether it's today or in next year or even before that, is to get your personal financial situation reviewed by preferably a health specific lender or a dental CPA. They will provide you with some good insights to take that first step.
And again, throwing it out there, Dr. Gause, you've had the privilege of doing it once and now again. If you could, please share some key advice or guidance that you'd give to yourself if you're to do it all over again.
Sure. Yeah, would definitely love to share this advice. Actually, my mother's a dentist, and she gave me this great advice to both myself and my brother, who has a fantastic practice as well. If you build it, they will come, right? So when signing a lease, when building a practice, this is a journey that hopefully you only go on a couple times, unless it's your intention to go on that journey a lot. But just be thoughtful and intentional about your field of dreams, and start with your vision and your mission, and really focus on the things that are going to make it fun for you to practice dentistry. And then there are all these other kind of professional aspects of getting into a business and getting into a space. And obviously one thing that I did right the first time around, and one thing that I'm really happy with what happened for the lease that I recently negotiated, is bring in the team of experts to go through with a fine-tooth comb and look through these leases, specifically in the upper Northeast, where I feel like landlords are just like an animal on their own. So definitely rely on professionals, not just to build the space, but also for the legal and accounting, blocking and tackling, but also very much for the building, right? So building a dental practice is not like building a condo. There's all the water and the air and all the things like that are very, very dental specific. So I said all that to say, start with your field of dreams, and then get the professionals to do the legal and accounting that needs to be done so that you can have an effective business.
Fantastic. A few pieces to add there. I had the privilege of doing some additional work with the BofA team on some recent webinars with the New York Dental Society and some of the others. And, there's some great best practices. So by, working with a mentor, working with people in industry, there's ways of looking at, paying off the interesting component, paying off even though you're paying your full visa balance due, right? It still can impact your debt to income ratio. So some of the tips and tricks for the doctors that are looking at applying a loan or otherwise, paying off that full credit card may actually have some positive impact for you. So as well as really understanding the business, and those that understand the process, time is leverage. Certainly from a lease and a real estate perspective, as you're looking at what can I do to get started, first off is thinking about and educating yourself about what is the process and what does that professional team look like? How do I assemble that professional team and follow the money, right? Who's getting paid by what? Who's getting paid by whom? Is there any conflict of interest, right? If you're paying more in rent, if you're paying more in, whatnot, does that increase commissions? How does that impact you, your rent, annual increases and beyond, right? Ultimately, you are the buyer, you are paying. It's important to find out who's getting paid by whom. From that perspective, what can I do to get started is beyond the education, which many of you are doing here tonight, right? Start helping to make sure that before you're signing on the dotted line, before you're getting too far beyond, get that second opinion, get it professionally reviewed to make sure that you're clear on exactly what the obligations are, and more importantly, the risk for yourself in these types of situations. Perfect.
Hey, Eric,
Please.
if I could jump in, I would just love to take out a highlighter and just highlight and underline your previous point. I just went through that with the lease that we just completed with your group. So prior to grabbing the assistance of your group, I was offered help from a business in New York that said they've negotiated thousands of leases and they know every neighborhood, every city block in New York. They know all the landlords. And by the way, the client doesn't even have to pay them. And I knew that we were in a moment where rents were going way down. There was a lot of opportunities due to COVID. And I was really excited about looking for spaces in Midtown Manhattan. And, when we started looking at the first 2 to 3 spaces, for some reason, these fees seemed like what they were before COVID, right? So it didn't take long to realize that this person was actually working for the landlords to find tenants, to get them into the spaces and to get them as close to market value as possible. And in my case, even above what the market kind of was at. So yeah, I just want to underline that point because I maybe wouldn't have understood it unless I just lived it. And it's better to pay a fee to somebody that's working on your behalf. So yeah, just wanted to underline that.
Appreciate it. The philosophy in our perspective is, right, charge the fee for value, right? Make sure it's aligned, make sure we're clear up front, and then to spend as much time or effort necessary to fight tooth and nail for every dollar, right? How could I, work to fight for every penny if underneath it all, the more you paid with the higher annual increases, with the longer the term, right, the more I would make. So excellent point. Actually, a perfect lead in for our second key question, which is now we're at a bit of a crossroads, right? Lots of the doctors joining, I'm sure, are looking at things from a Rockefeller glass half full approach, right? We're coming through the far side of this COVID craziness. So now I'm sure the questions might have come through is to say, hey, is now a time to think about renegotiating? Or should I finally bite the bullet and pick up and relocate to that practice of my dreams, right? What do my numbers look like? Is it the right time, right? Is it the right decision, right? It's a lot of risk, it's upfront cost. Do I want to take more debt, right? Or should I add a second location, right? Which is an interesting component, especially for those looking to build, grow, and multiply, which we've a lot of experience helping doctors with. So Dr. Gause, you just went through a similar situation. Again, to your colleagues, associates, or new, younger doctors, or even mid-career doctors, what can you share about how you went to approach this situation?
Well, I guess to the question, should the doctor negotiate or relocate or add a second location? If you need to do it now, because it seems, just back of the envelope, it seems like our city is rebounding, seems like rents are going up, feels like New York again. The Knicks are playing, Giants are playing, like things are coming back to normal. So I think if you're interested in having an office of your own, if you're out of space, which was my issue, I was out of space in my 3-chair office. or if you think you might even be out of space soon and don't want to get locked into like a 10-year lease and be kind of out of space for 7 of the 10 years, like I kind of was in my own, in my first lease. If you're interested in getting some more space, do it now, because I don't have a crystal ball any more than anyone else, but it sure feels like rents are going to go up soon.
Excellent. And Dr. Gause, you were sharing a little bit about patients, right? Looking at active patients versus what percentage of the active patients you had in terms of the children market as well. I'm going to share a little bit about how you looked across your clientele, active patients, and help to determine what that meant in terms of square footage and growth of the practice.
Sure. Well, I think every dental practice, at least from advice from my mentors, every dental practice should try to add at least one service a year. Dentists are notorious for going to the Greater New York show, picking up a lot of pamphlets, getting interested in a lot of new stuff, and then coming back and trying to deploy all of this new knowledge all at once. And then the excitement fades, and then you get back to what you were doing before, and you never really add anything fun or new or profitable. But mentors of mine have been very successful, and I'm talking people that have practiced dentistry 20 years, 30 years, have amazing practices, all in their niche, whether it's fee for service or insurance, great margins, and still have the joy of practicing dentistry. They've been effective at selecting one or two things a year and adding those services. So for us this year, we're adding pediatric services, and just it's kind of what feels right for me. I've never done it, but just became a dad. I'm really enjoying being a dad, and I'm also looking at the premium that people pay for any kind of a service for a kid. And I also need a dentist for my kids. So it's just kind of the one thing that I'm interested in adding to our practice. And by adding those services, you also need space to deliver the services. Hate to dumb it down, but I love the example of dentistry making money like a barbershop. We make a certain amount of revenue per chair. If you look at it like that, you don't need an MBA. You don't need fancy schmancy accountant. You have a certain number of chairs, and you divide that by your revenue over the year. And so if you're running an effective business and you're booked, adding chairs is definitely something that's going to add to the gross revenue and also to the profit, and also to the fun of practicing dentistry as you see kind of your vision becoming bigger and bigger, and even going outside of just the two hands that you used in dental school.
It's a great point. With kids the same age, it's unbelievable how much you pay for all the things you never thought you'd be paying for. I feel your pain. Excellent. No, great components. On the KPI front, you're right. Working with dental advisors, working with a trusted team, they can start to challenge you on, right? Is now the right time? And depending on, whereabouts you are, typically in some cases, for some practices, it can be about 250 per chair, for example. And, hey, what is my revenue per chair? And what is the opportunity if I had a fourth or a fifth or a sixth, right? What would that do for my business? How would I utilize it? What can I do differently? And really looking at that from the business perspective. Other components there that we look at in terms of KPIs, building on Dr. Gause's points, are looking at what percentage of my revenue today is going to tenancy expense, right? And then what can I do? And perhaps I'm to the point where suddenly you're reaching out to Shine and you're asking for the double-decker chairs because you've got a lineup behind each operatory throughout the course of the day, right? So from that perspective, what now can you do a little differently to help look at, and it should be about 8.32%. So for each dollar that comes in, about 8 cents, 8.5 cents should be going to tenancy expense. If it's a little higher, right, it could be a rent problem or production problem, right? If it's a little lower, the practice could potentially, right, afford a little more, right, and still be quite healthy. So if you're contemplating expanding into the adjacent suites, what a nice way of doing it to be able to, right, bust a hole in the wall, add another 2 or 3 chairs, and be able to build on that without having to pick up and completely relocate the practice. So great points there. And the other component I would add before passing it to Rob is what's the market doing, right? What are these vacancies looking like? And you know what, is now the right time to look at ground floor retail? What else could be done to take advantage of, let it be rental rates, vacancies, and the greater market, financing, et cetera, right? To help make sure that you're taking advantage of economic conditions, low rates or otherwise, to help make sure that you're finally able to build with the structure you need for success. So from that perspective, on the financial side, perfect lead in, Rob?
Yeah, so it is definitely a unique environment. We are seeing more supply of commercial space for doctors to move to or potentially start additional locations or first locations. The pandemic obviously has been, troublesome and difficult period in time, but it has lent to the opportunity of just more commercial spaces available and more opportunities for young doctors to pursue their first location or businesses to expand. And with that, as long as you have proper representation, when you go down that path looking for space, you should have some leverage points with these potential future spaces, whether they be landlords or future purchases of real estate. So today is actually more along the lines a good time to find real estate. We've seen different things like escalations year over years go down because landlords are more open to that. In some parts of New York and we'll say the tri-state area, we've also seen larger tenant improvement allowances. Obviously, that is dependent upon specifically what type of space it is and the value not only to the landlord, but the value to the community or future business owners. But I do feel like more along the lines of this point in history, we've seen some great opportunities for doctors, and we've seen those doctors, take the initiative, and they're in good spaces long term for very, very reasonable terms. Which is a huge value to any doctor down the road when they're looking to potentially retire. I mean, the impact of the lease today will have huge impacts to a sale moving forward down the road. So if you're considering it, today is a good time to consider space finding.
Yeah, I'll add a little.
There's one more point. Just when you're talking about the market, I would love to look at one more piece of the market, and that's the market of our profession of dentistry. So there are, I know from close family members that were dentists, from an uncle down in another state who's a dentist that practiced into his 80s. A lot of dentists retired over the last year, and many of them were practicing just for the joy of practicing dentistry and the feeling that we get when we get to small talk with our patients, and also because dentists define themselves as a dentist, as part of kind of our core DNA. And a lot of people just kind of hung it up over the last year. And so there is definitely a fair number of patients that just flooded into the market needing a home. So for younger or even kind of mid-career dentists that are trying to evaluate, do they want to run the risk of signing their name on a dotted line for a lease, and am I going to make it? There's a lot of patients out there that are in need of general dentistry or specialty services. And that's something that, I hate to say good that came out of COVID, but there's a lot more patients that flooded into the market that need a dentist. So again, now's a good time to plant a flag and then start marketing efforts to bring some of those people in.
point. I mean, I'll add a little flavor to it is, in terms of renegotiating or relocating, do both. Meaning not necessarily adding a second location, but one of the strategies we're employing now is a have your cake and eat it too strategy. And not to reference Boston, especially with the Yankees playing the Red Sox currently. But in Boston, we just had a doctor hired us to renegotiate her lease. And you know what? Just to keep the landlord honest, we put the fishing pole in the water, right? And just sent a location down the street and talked to that landlord that had a high degree of vacancies with a beautiful new location. And that landlord, we were able to negotiate over $283,720 of tenant improvement allowance. She wrote us a beautiful 5-star Google review, but it was such a neat component that do both, right? Meaning negotiate the best possible rate. What are they willing to do to keep you? While also, hey, what's that landlord down the street that got obliterated with all their retail clients and nail salon, barbershops, et cetera, right? And what would they do to earn the business, right, of a prominent dentist that is going to bring high quality foot traffic with them? So again, don't underestimate your leverage and ability to negotiate a great deal. And to add on to Dr. Gause's point, if we're looking at a second location, right, that could be both the buy or build. And you're right, there's a ton of doctors now looking to transition and sell. And it seems like yesterday I was standing next to Michael Appalucci, who many of you may know on the practice transitions team at Henry Schein, right? Who's there as a great pulse on doctors looking to sell and transition, right? So you may be surprised at some doctors that are just wanting to get out and are just having enough. And like my godfather, we're used to actually practicing wet finger dentistry, pre-latex. And now transitioning to walking into the operatory, right, with all this, PPE on. So, don't underestimate what there might be to buying some charts, right, or being able to take over some of these smaller satellite locations for a doctor that's just done and wanting to get out, but might be stuck with a long-term lease or something, right, and now looking for some different flexibilities. Great points. Risk. Principally, people think financial. So Rob, maybe kick us off in terms of guidance that you can give of the almost 500 doctors you've worked with in the past. What are some ways to help them reduce or mitigate risk?
So I could honestly say we always suggest having a business plan or a plan of action. The benefit to that is there is obviously a lot of moving parts whenever you take any sort of opportunity, whether it be your first or second location. And there has been a direct correlation by our clients that have invested in time creating these plans and the success of those doctors. So the benefit to having a business plan or that plan of action is not to a bank, but it's to yourself, right? It will provide some structures on steps that you could take today and the steps that you need to take, obviously, in the future, and honestly coordinating all those moving parts. Obviously, if you're doing something like construction project, there is a lot of moving parts. So we always suggest having a business plan will help reduce some of the risks, and obviously surrounding yourself with people or trusted advisors in the dental community is another way that you could greatly reduce your risk. I would say let your experts. Yeah, let the experts be the experts. You can't be an expert in everything. So, delegate where you need to get the proper information and make sure it's vetted.
Yeah, let's look at risk for a second, right? Risk can be surprises. Risk can be unpleasant surprises. Risk can be liabilities. If we boil it down that way, let's think about the lease as that big check, right? That is your binding to your successors and heirs. And it's not just a month to month. We're talking about, in many cases, a multi-million-dollar contract. So number one, those that have signed a personal guarantee, right? Many are surprised to know that even in the event that if there's any dispute, the landlord can leapfrog over your corporation and come after you personally, right? So personal guarantees are very, very common if you're a new doctor in a new location, but it doesn't mean they have to be there forever and ever, amen. right? The goal here is, especially as you're renegotiating a lease after 10 years, you're starting to pay off all your loans and student debts, et cetera, right? It's also a good opportunity to help protect yourself from risk. And of course, when you're signing up your first practice and you're 30 years of age and hey, everything's great, right? I've got all this debt. Hey, take a number type of thing, Mr. Landlord, right? But now, as you're achieving success, right, growing families, et cetera, protecting yourself is key. So helping to limit or reduce personal guarantees, or at least determining if, even after you sell, many of you would be surprised that there's a continuing liability clause in most leases throughout New York, where even after they've sold, they'll still remain continually and personally liable. No different as what they are today. It's almost like you're leasing a car for your neighbor's kid and then moving out of state, right? So that's the sort of exposure that when you're looking to sell, give yourself that protection. Other things like death and disability, giving you or your estate the ability to have an exit clause, right? Do you pull the pin and give yourself 60 days to terminate the lease? Or at least, heaven forbid, if you're not there and therefore you are in default, right, because you are not there, right, giving your estate the ability to renew the lease. So at least, right, Rob or otherwise can get you sufficient loan. If there's only 1 year of lease left, right, Rob is going to have an almost impossible time to get you that new loan, right, because there's just too much risk. There's no predictability of revenue there. Rob, anything to add on that front?
100% accurate. Any bank, whether it be ours or another healthcare lender, will require a 5-year lease at minimum. So the importance to a bank and to be able to pursue a financing option is huge. Making sure that you're with a party just like Cirrus that can help guide you along that path when you're ready to take it, or to go down that road when you're ready to look at it or renegotiate potentially.
Got it. And Dr. Gause, from your perspective, how do you define risk, and what are some ways that you do with your practice and yourself and your business to help mitigate risk?
Well, there's risk, and then there's dental risk, right? So I'm very close with a gentleman across the street that owns an Italian menswear store that's iconic on 57th Street. And for him to get up and move his office during COVID took a couple months. He got a better space for cheaper, and boom, he was open. For us, there are all of these other things that are unique to the profession of dentistry, from medical gases to the amount of time that it takes for us to build a space, to x-rays. There are just so many things. So I don't even want to know what's on the list. I want to focus on practicing dentistry and having fun and talking to my patients and just doing what I love. And then also I want to have a significant amount of time to be at home and doing the things that I enjoy, like traveling and stuff like that. So love to leave kind of the line by line to people that are used to not only looking at risks, but dental risks. And so if you're talking about lease negotiations, that's not at all like negotiating for an Italian menswear store, right? So you want to have somebody that knows all of the nuanced things that have happened to dentists over decades and decades and decades of kind of real estate transactions and leases. So that, and you know what? The fact of the matter is that with most landlords, and especially New York landlords, you're not going to get concessions on every point. These guys are really tough. So in my lease negotiations, it's been worth its weight in gold to, if there are a list of 10 things that are creating some kind of risk to my business, even having help in prioritizing these 3, Lee, if these are in the lease, don't sign the lease. These 4 or 5, I'm telling you, this is really bad, but at least you know what you're signing. And these, you should try and get these out, but these are no big deal. And those are just in there so that they ease our negotiations. But as a dentist, everything that we're doing, from the build out, from the lease negotiation, from the banking, from the accounting, all of it is very specific to our industry. So just using experts from within the profession of dentistry is going to help mitigate the risk and increase probability of success.
Well said. It's just to add a couple of additional components is think about risk as well as what are you building towards? Not only the legacy, but what are you eventually looking to sell? So thinking about things differently as risk is what's anything that could potentially be a roadblock when I eventually go to sell, right? And what so many doctors do is they'll, oh, I guess I'm going to sell now without doing the proper preparation, let it be the accounting side or legal side or otherwise, or even just the lease, right? Leaving not enough term or exercising their last option so that when they go to sell, suddenly now the landlord knows you're looking to sell, right? And suddenly now your negotiation leverage is completely changed. And now, unfortunately, right, why would the landlord take you off as a personal guarantor at the end, right? They know you're going, right? What's in it for the landlord? So yes, think of it as putting a protective force field around your practice sale proceeds. And again, for all the building owners that are, I saw a number through the polling earlier, right? It's the same thing, but more, right? Now you've got the deep well theory that the lawyers love. So if you own your building personally and you own your practice personally, right? That's double the target. So the next thing is if you ever want to sell, what happens if, right, you want to keep your building and your practice, you want to sell separately, right? But yet again, the risk is, well, hey, what if I've used the same credit card to buy a new handpiece as I did to fix the roof? And there wasn't that proper separation from the different costs. Makes it very difficult to evaluate versus to say, look, here's the lease I've had for myself for the past 10 years and just assigning it to that new buyer as you transition to a full-time landlord. So, and also what risk do you want to be responsible if you are going to become a full-time landlord or your spouse, right, if you were to pass? So these are some great ways of looking at risk. And the final key question here is dental specific resources. So Dr. Gause, you were just mentioning it, but maybe you can just put a final nail in that as well in terms of, from your perspective, the different resources and, why is it worth the premium to get those that know the space in dentistry or any specific, return that you can see from that?
Well, actually, I haven't found that it costs a premium. I think it costs the same as using somebody that's non-dental specific. And I think as dentists, many of us are small business owners, and we sometimes may fall into the mistakes that small business owners would fall into, like using my cousin for the accountant and using the person that goes to the gym as my attorney, whether they're the best suited for the type of transaction or the type of business that they're doing or not. I'm also a big fan of knowing your business the best, right? So if you use people that are, banker that's used to working exclusively with dentists or lease negotiators that are used to working exclusively with dentists, they really help you know your business the best. And it's not like you just give them a contract and they put a green stamp or a red stamp on it. I mean, there is an educational process that occurs through these negotiations or through these applications that really help you learn about your business and then enter into the transaction with confidence. So yeah, that's pretty much my MO. Anytime I can use a dental specific person, I want to do that versus people that have no exposure to the profession. I mean, that's pretty much a no-brainer.
Appreciate that. And Rob, obviously you've seen through 460 of these. What would you share, Rob, in terms of just, again, the real candid pros, cons, et cetera, for those that, again, may do it for less or might claim that they do it or do the same? What other sort of specifics or perhaps really tangible stuff for a doctor that might be skeptical of just someone that's focused on dentistry?
Yeah, I mean, not to be redundant, but Dr. Gause hit it like the nail right on the head. We've seen some mistakes, obviously, from doctors that have decided to use friends or family. A few stick out because I know they were very costly. For instance, I had a doctor use a friend to build out their office. He was a contractor in New York. Everyone kind of knows a contractor. So he decided to use his friend because his friend was the least expensive during the bidding process, and he gave his friend a shot. That friend of his made some mistakes, probably a few too many, and it was the cost to him was $50,000 over the original contracting price because he made some mistakes in plumbing because he was not familiar with building out a dental office. Something like that. Obviously, they're probably not friends any longer, but it cost time and money that was, the doctor kind of stepped over $1 to pick up a penny is what they say, right? So that was just a specific example where I felt like it could have been avoided had they done a better job of vetting, getting resources, and understanding the value of people. Like when I was a kid growing up, I thought I maybe a fighter pilot or potentially a police officer. I happen to be a banker for dentists. So because the dental profession is such a good profession, it's created all these other specialized professions, right? Dental CPAs, dental lease negotiators, dental builders. Like, take advantage of that. Their whole profession is built on understanding your profession as a doctor. The best thing you could do is surround yourself with people you trust, vet those people out, and honestly, allow them to do their job. Because that is important. When you take a journey of practice ownership or growing your business. Like I said, lots of moving parts. You want to be able to surround yourself with people that can handle that for you in a lot of times. So, that is some of the best things that you could do with your time is vetting people, and surrounding yourself with a team of good dental specific resources.
Yeah, and I think the thing I'd add is again, if things don't work, what's the point? Meaning, that death and disability clause I was just touching on, right? If someone that doesn't know the specifics of dentistry puts it in, hey, death and disability, sure. But if it's not specific, right? Lower back pain, carpal tunnel, hand tremors, etc., any of those, you might not be deemed disabled, but you certainly can't practice chairside or might have difficulties in doing so. So without some of that language could be a significant issue that we've only found out for doing this for 27 years, right? And we get all the phone calls when things go wrong. So what's interesting, and also things like the associates clause. So many doctors bring in 1099s unknowingly and bring them in, and suddenly now, right, the landlord can deem them that, hey, you're not the tenant, right? You're another business coming in, working into that space and generating revenue. So either A, the landlord can hold you in default, or B, and more likely, use it to increase rent, right? And this was certainly big back in the 80s when all the vending machines came in, and the landlord suddenly said, well, hang on a second, right? Now suddenly, right, 10 feet of that space is going to this vending machine, which another company's coming in, you're making money off it. Whoa, that should be my money. Right. So Dr. Gause comparing dentistry to the barber shop. I certainly don't want to compare dentistry to a vending machine. However, right, having language like an associates clause can make sure that you're not held in default by having independent contractors or other business owners into your practice, right, to work without getting in issues with the landlord. So all fantastic points. Again, just a reminder for all those, any additional Q&A. And on that note, certainly from that perspective, we'll pull up a poll here in appreciation of everyone's time. We waive the fees for our critical dates and risk analysis. So if you're thumbing through your lease and you're concerned about some of these components, if you're looking through your financial situation and you're saying, hey, you know what, maybe now is the time to look at the situation a little differently and how maybe it's a refinance opportunity, etc. There's sections here to request a quick call as a quick yes for Rob or a quick analysis with myself or the team. to help really look through to make sure that you're getting the right guidance. And again, both are complementary based on your time and attendance here this evening. So as that fills out,
you didn't even put me on that in case any of these dentists need a dentist. Just kidding.
Good point. Great point. So last but not least, Dr. Gause, for the dentists that need a dentist, you can't go wrong. Midtown. I still got you. Perfect. So again, we'll open up the floor for questions, but on a personal note, I truly can't thank you both for your time this evening. I know there's lots going on in the city, and certainly it's a pleasure to have you both on and your expertise. We'll certainly be using this. I know a lot of our partners or otherwise will be sharing a lot of this through their internal teams for training, et cetera. So it's a great opportunity to provide just great help, right? The big takeaway from all of this, doctors, is you're not alone, right? There's been thousands and hundreds of thousands of doctors before you that have gone through these exact same challenges. Don't feel that you have to do it all on your own. Don't feel that you've got to be the one that, you know, is headstrong to say, hey, I'm just going to negotiate my own lease, or hey, I'm just going to go figure out my own loan. Take your time. Time is leverage. Don't get pressure sold, right, on the trunk of a broker's car to sign a binding 10-year lease or letter of intent, right, before you've even seen the lease. Right? Don't underestimate your leverage and the power you have as a dentist, and make sure you've got the right protection, because you owe it to yourself, your family, right? And your patients. And certainly to make sure that all the hard work, all the investment you've done into yourself and schooling, right? It is only as good as what you can do to help to protect it. So truly thank you for everybody's time. I'll switch to Q&A. I see the vast majority are still on. So from that perspective, one of the first questions from Matt, Dr. S, should the lease be structured as triple D to the practice owned space? I believe that's triple net to the practice. So great point. So the question here is, for those of you that own your own space, how do I set it up? There's three main buckets. Number one is a triple net lease, which similar to leasing an apartment maybe. Right, you're getting the base rent, and then you're paying plus water, plus gas, plus Con Ed, et cetera. Right, everything else is on top of it. Similarly for the lease. So first of all, right, speaking of the accounting specific team or dental specific team, your accountant would be good to give from a tax advice, and they may share that, look, a triple net might be beneficial, because you'd want to place more expenses on one versus the other, right? Depending on the structure you have, as well as, right, think about it from the sale. So when you become a full-time landlord, what do you want to do for administration, for example? If it's a single standalone building in Buffalo, for example, right, what specifically does that do for you? And it might be easier to be a gross lease, right, or a modified gross lease, where the administration it's just one lump sum payment. It includes everything. And again, if the roof goes down, that's on you, right? But it certainly gives you the flexibility to choose the type of lease that is going to be best suited for you, not only in the short term, but the long term. Other things to consider on that front is certainly from a control, right? You're about to sell your practice. That's what you're focused on. But don't underestimate the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years of being a full-time landlord, right? What if that doctor wants to flip the practice in a year from now, right? And how much control do you want to have if you don't like that incoming doctor? Or even worse, let's say they want to relocate after a couple of years, right? And they want to tear out all the gear and, rip everything out and all those beautiful A-deck cabinetry that you've purchased, right? How are you going to feel about that? Right. So these are the type of things that you might not be considering at all as you're going to sell your practice. But thinking that 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years ahead, right, even down to your kids that may be running that real estate down the line, right? How do we make sure it's structured in a way that maximizes your benefits, minimizes the risk, right, and helps to ensure that it's a smooth transition and that you're avoiding those frustrations and surprises that can come down the line. Okay, another quick question here that just came through. Is it possible to renegotiate the rent due to the slowdown of the dental practice as a result of COVID-19? But the lease started 2 years ago. So I mean, Dr. Gause, you've looked at that a little bit uniquely lately. What's been your experience in terms of lease negotiations now? Would it be with your existing practice, right, or the new location you've recently added?
I did not have any opportunity to negotiate midstream. It just so happened that our lease was officially finishing, so we were able to renegotiate to have a new lease. But I don't really have any. I'm sure some people did and some people didn't, and maybe it depends on the landlord, but I would definitely defer to you guys on kind of what you're seeing across lots and lots of dentists.
I mean, just to add some color, I mean, if you're 2 years into a 10-year term, always look at it from the landlord side. What's in it for them? Right? And of course, if you're locked in and they've already, run that all the way to rob at the bank, then, what is in it for them? Is there an expansion opportunity, right? Is there a big, perhaps renovation you're contemplating? But if the landlord ultimately cares about term and rent, so if your lease isn't coming up for renewal, meaning in the next 2 or 3 years, then you don't necessarily have the same leverage as you'd have less leverage if you're midstream. So again, typically the answer to your question is no, right? Is it possible to renegotiate? Anything's possible, but it's got to make sense to the landlord. It's got to be to their financial benefit, and you've really got to want it. But the best time to do it is typically 2 to 3 years prior to your lease expiring, or certainly as much time prior to letter of intent if you're looking at a new deal from that perspective. So great components. Good. I certainly wanted to be respectful of everyone's time. We're about 8:15. Throw it back to the panelists. Rob, Dr. Lee, anything else to add?
I wish great luck to all the docs out there that are contemplating new offices. Now is a great time. If anybody wants to connect offline, super easy to find our offices in Manhattan, Smile Design Manhattan, on text and Instagram and all this stuff like that. So good luck, Field of Dreams. You guys got this.
If you build it, they will come. Rob, any final thoughts?
Well, first of all, I just want to thank you guys for having me. Honestly, one of the best panels I've been on. I was lucky enough, I've been in Dr. Gause's office, and like when you walk in, he was a man with a plan, and he has such a beautiful office with great aesthetics. If you're by there, I would go in there and just check it out because I think you'll be impressed. And I can't say enough about Eric and Cirrus Consulting. They've been a super great resource for our clients in the New York marketplace. And, that's, half the battle is having good people around you, I think, in life in general. So those are good people, and they will do the right thing by you. And I'm available if you ever want to just talk through your current opportunity or future opportunity and learn a little bit about what we as a bank offer you as a doctor that's specific to, your opportunity, your profession.
Fantastic. Again, thank you very much for everybody's time. You're not alone in all of this. If you build it, they will come. And if they ask you to sign it, get a second opinion before you sign it. It doesn't have the same ring to it. Truly appreciate both of your times, guys. Have a fantastic evening, and go Yankees.
Take care. Have a good night.
Have a great day. Thanks, guys.